Okay, today we had quite a long day. We're going to continue on our journey by looking at the remaining 6 signs in the Gospel of John. Now, before we look into the second sign, I just want to read one passage from the Gospel of John, just to highlight that sometimes, or rather a lot of time, John actually uses irony in his Gospel. Let us turn to John. Chapter 13, verse 30. John chapter 13, verse 30. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. The context of John chapter 13 was that Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, and after that, he predicted his betrayal. He himself said that in verse 18, that he who shared my bread has turned against me, and then he told the disciples that one of them will subsequently deny him. And so Simon Peter asked Jesus, "Hey, Lord, who is the one that's going to betray you?" And Jesus said, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I dip it into the dish." And Jesus did that and gave it to Judas. And so Jesus told Judas, "What you are about to do so quickly." And Judas got up. After he had taken the bread, he went out. And verse 30 says, "And it was night." Now, this is actually quite an interesting literary feature that we see in the Gospel of John. Now, we already know that it was already evening. It was already night when Jesus had this Last Supper with the disciples. And we already know that after supper, when Jesus dipped it and gave that bread to Judas, he would walk out, and we know when he walked out, it was night. The day is already night already. But why was it that John emphasized the fact that when Judas walked out from the presence of Jesus and the rest of the disciples, it was night? Why was there a need to state what was the obvious, right? And so what John was trying to do sometime is there is this double meaning in what he's trying to say. Yes, the day was night. Yes, it was night out there. But what is more important is that Jesus was there with them when he had the supper. And before this, Jesus has already declared that I am the light of the world. So in the presence of Jesus, there is light. In fact, he is the light of the world. Now, when Judas chooses to walk out from the presence of the light of the world, you walk into darkness. So there's this double meaning when you say, "And it was night." Yes, it was night out there, but it was a different night when Judas chose to betray Jesus and walk out from the very presence of the light of the world. So you see that John has this kind of double meaning. So sometimes when you read John, you say, "Hey, the people welcome Jesus." Now, is this welcome a real welcome? Or is it because they welcome Jesus because they want Jesus to satisfy their needs? They welcome Jesus as a miracle worker, not as God. They will welcome Jesus as the one that will tickle their ears when they listen to him teaching, but they have no intention to follow Jesus. You see, there's always this kind of double meaning we see in the Gospel of John. So when we come to the second sign, which is the healing of the official son, we see that there's this couple of layers of double meaning that John uses here. So let's turn to John chapter 4 and let's read this passage. John chapter 4, verse 43. After the 2 days, he left for Galilee. Now, Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. When he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. They had seen all that he has done in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, for they had also been there. Once more, he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. The royal official said, Sir, come down before my child dies. Go, Jesus replied, your son will live. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servant met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 in the afternoon, the fever left him. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole household believed. This was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. Now, yesterday we talked about the movement of Jesus a little bit, right? When we talked about Jesus performed the first sign in Cana, and then he moved to Jerusalem, right? So where Jesus was heading was, it was in Cana, very close to Galilee, the Sea of Galilee in the region. This is the whole region of Galilee. And Jesus went all the way up to Jerusalem, where he cleansed the temple. There was a Passover, and then he had a conversation with Nicodemus about being born again. And then from there, Jesus traveled to the region of Samaria, where he had a conversation with a Samaritan woman, and the Samaritan declared that surely this is a savior of the world. And then from there, Jesus heads back to Cana. Right? So this is where the second sign comes into the picture. Now, this travel of Jesus to Cana, after that to Capernaum, we see that this is the region where Jesus performed much of his signs. And in Jerusalem, the people have also heard that Jesus performed a lot of signs. Now, so this movement from here to here is also significant, because when you read in verse 45, the Galileans heard all that he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, for they had also been there. So the Jews, they would travel 3 times a year to Jerusalem during the Feast of Passover, Tabernacle, and the Feast of Weeks. That is according to the law of Moses. And so Passover means that everyone would make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So when Jesus was in Jerusalem in John chapter 2 and 3, some of the Jewish people from Galilee were there. So they have heard what Jesus did. What did they hear? Probably they hear Jesus cleansing the temple. Probably they heard about other signs that Jesus had performed in Jerusalem. So now they are all back here in Cana, and these people from the region of Galilee heard what Jesus did in Jerusalem, and they sort of welcomed Jesus. Oh, welcome back. You're our hero. We heard what you did. What fantastic things that you have done in Jerusalem. Perhaps some of those people who particularly don't like the Jewish religious leaders who say, hey, Jesus, bravo, you cleanse the temple, good on you. Not the kind of conversation that the people welcome him. But interestingly, when we come back to Cana, we read a few things here. Jesus was actually not welcomed by the people. Let's read again in verse 43. After the 2 days, he left for Galilee. Now, Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Now, if I can go back 2 more slides, let's not forget that this is the region that Jesus grew up. right? This is Nazareth here, right? This is where Jesus grew up in Nazareth. Capernaum, this is where Jesus made his headquarters during his adult ministry. Cana, this is a place where Jesus performed the first sign, and now he's back here doing the second sign. Now, if you look at this region, Cana is about 15, 16 kilometers north of Nazareth. Capernaum is about 15 miles. That will probably be about 20 over kilometers. So it's within this vicinity. So the people would have known about Jesus. He's from Nazareth, and he has been to Cana and to Capernaum. So this is the region that he has grown up. And that's why Jesus said in verse 44 that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Now, when Jesus said that a prophet has no honor in his own country, have you ever wondered why would Jesus bother going back to Galilee, knowing that he will never be welcome in that sense? Now, what is interesting, if you look at verse 43, now I'm not sure what Bible translations you are using. In verse 44, this word here, the word that is translated as now in NIV, is a very interesting conjunction. It's a very interesting conjunction in Greek. Right? In Greek, the conjunction is ga. We pronounce it as ga. And this conjunction in Greek has a very fluid meaning. It can mean now, it can mean then, it can mean since, it can mean because. So the meaning is actually very fluid. So oftentimes we have to decide, as interpreters or translators, we have to decide based on context, what does this little conjunction mean? Because conjunction actually can change a lot of meaning. So in some of English translation, you'll find that it is not translated. It just says that Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Now NIV pick it up, and NIV translates as now Jesus himself had pointed out that the prophet has no honor in his own country. But this conjunction sometimes, and many times, can also be translated as because. Now, if I were to translate because, how would it look like? After 2 days, he left for Galilee because Jesus himself had pointed out a prophet has no honor in his own country. You see how sometimes the meaning becomes slightly different because of one little conjunction in the Greek text. So this conjunction, when I teach Greek to our students, I always tell them that it's very important. You have to discern what it means. And many times in our English translation, we just leave it out because probably translators find it very difficult to translate this conjunction. Now, whatever it is, we know that Jesus has said that he will not be welcome. A prophet has no honor. But why is it that he still goes back to the place where he knows there is no honor? And John has given us many clues. In John chapter 1, verse 11, John has said that Jesus came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. So why did Jesus still go back? If you know that you're not going to be welcome, you know that you have no honor, why still go to a particular place, right? Isn't it? I mean, for us, if I know that I'm not welcome here, will I still want to come here? No, I would not. I will walk away, I'll run far away. But why is, in Chinese we'll say, why is Jesus so thick-skinned? Does he want to go to a place where he's not welcome? Now, this is where John, I think, underlying all this thing, was telling us a very important message. Even though Jesus knew that he's not welcome, even though Jesus knew that he has no honor in his own kampong, he would still go back because that is the mission of God. He knows that this is what God has called him to do. So he would still go to his people to teach them, to bring the good news of God to his people. Well, sometimes being a Christian, being a Christ follower, being thick-skinned is also good. Sometimes we just have to be thick-skinned a little bit when we stand up for God. So Jesus did that. Now, quite what's interesting is when we come to verse 45, when he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. Now, if John were to end here, when he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, we would think that, wow, everybody, hey, Jesus, you're not a prophet without honor. See, your own kampong people welcome you. But John continues saying, they had seen all that he has done in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, for they also had been there. So in other words, the people, when they welcome Jesus, is not a true welcome because they have seen what happened in Jerusalem. So they are not welcoming a Messiah. They are probably welcoming someone that they think can help them overthrow the religious authority of the Roman Empire so that Jesus can be their political king. We will look at one more sign later. After Jesus fed the 5,000, the response of the crowd immediately was that they want to make Jesus king. And Jesus withdrew. So could this be where the people say, hey, Jesus, you are that kind of political leader we are looking for. You have guts. You dare to go against the religious authority in Jerusalem. You dare to stand up against that. You dare to cleanse the temple. We have seen nothing like that before. You're the man. So Jesus, would you do so for the Roman Empire as well? Can you imagine what was going on in the mind of the people? They welcomed Jesus not because he is God. They welcomed Jesus not because he was Emmanuel. They welcomed Jesus not because he was the Messiah. They welcomed Jesus because they have seen what he did. And notice, John says here they have seen what, John said they had seen what he had done in Jerusalem. Is it the sign that they see? Or is it merely miracles that they see? You see or not? That's why John always uses the word sign. So perhaps the people was not very genuine when they welcomed Jesus. They welcomed a hero, certainly not the Messiah. In John chapter 2, if you go back earlier, Jesus was in Jerusalem. John already gave us a clue. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about him, for he himself knew what was in man. John already gave us a clue. Those in Jerusalem may have seen what Jesus did. They may believe in him, but Jesus knows that their belief in him is not a genuine belief. That's what John said. Jesus, on his part, did not entrust to them. And so when the crowd go back to Galilee, they welcome Jesus. So Jesus knew. And John has given us a clue in chapter 2. In chapter 2 that all these people that have sinned, they are not genuine. Perhaps they wanted something more from Jesus. Right? So John has given us all this clue that the people may have welcomed Jesus, but really they are not welcoming. They only welcome Jesus when Jesus is prepared to do what they want. If Jesus is not prepared to do what they want, sorry, you're not welcome here. It's like a welcome but unwelcoming. You see the irony, the paradox there? And yet it was believing in Jesus but not true believing. It was believing and yet unbelieving at the same time. It was believing, wow, you are the one, you're great because you're going to be that political Messiah. The minute you're not going to be what we want, the minute you refuse to let us make you king, we will not believe. In fact, John chapter 6 tells us that after Jesus had a long conversation with the disciples about the bread of life, we'll look at it later on. Many people left Jesus and they said, this is a hard teaching, who can accept it? At that point in time, Jesus turned to the disciples and asked them, look, the crowd has left. Do you want to leave too? And Simon Peter told Jesus, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we have come to believe that you are God. You are the Son of the living God. The people, after hearing Jesus' message, and all this happened in the region of Galilee, they departed, they left. So they may believe as long as they hear what they like to hear. The minute they hear a hard teaching, they are prepared to leave. So this is what I meant by believing, and yet at the same time it is unbelieving. I will believe in Jesus as long as it fits into what I want this God to do for me. I will not believe if this is a hard teaching. And sometimes we can be like that too when we follow after Jesus. If it's something that we like to hear, great. But it's something that is tough and is hard teaching, we might not want to hear. If you don't like the sermons here in this church, I always say, we have plenty churches. You can just go anywhere. If you don't like here, never mind. Just go across the highway. My church is at St. Paul's. You know? And if you don't like it, go around the corner. Kingdom City is there. You know? If you don't like it, go further down the road. BUMC is there. You know what I mean? We have plenty of churches for us to go to if you don't like a sermon. So sometimes we hear, I don't like the sermons, I want to move elsewhere. Why? Because it doesn't it doesn't meet our needs of what we want to hear. And I always say that we are fortunate people. We live in a generation and era where there's modern technology. You don't like the sermons, you can live stream other sermons. There are plenty of resources available for us to grow in the Lord. And we could have been like the Jewish people. We want our ears to be tickled because we want Jesus to teach us what we like to hear. We like to see Jesus do what we want to see, and we are prepared to believe Him. We are prepared to welcome Him as long as He does that. And that's what the people is doing. So when I painted this background, then you see the narrative shifts already, right, in John. If you go down to verse 48, verse 46, once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where turned the water into wine, and there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. So enter this official. So you see, in the midst of all those things, the Jewish people who believe by not believing, the Jewish people who welcome but not welcoming, enter this royal official, and whose son lay sick at Capernaum. And this man, when he heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Now, this royal official is a Gentile. He is one of the officials of the Roman Empire. And his duty at that point in time would have been to ensure that there's peace in the region in Galilee. Now, why is it that the Roman Empire stationed royal officials there? Now, during the time of Jesus, Galilee was not as peaceful as it should be. And there's a lot of riots, there's a lot of rebellion going on in that area. It has been recorded that there's a number of rebellion, a number of uprising, that the people memberontak, the people who are going against the Roman Empire, and all these riots, all this rebellion had to be suppressed, and that is why they sometimes station royal officials there and the duty to ensure that there's peace in that region. And that's why you see a royal official in the predominant Jewish area. Now, the northern shore of Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, Cana, all this area that you see are mainly Jewish area. If you go to the eastern shore, that's where Decapolis is located, and that would be the Gentile area. So the northern shore is predominantly Jewish, and here you have a Gentile that was stationed there to ensure that there is peace. So came this Gentile who must have heard about Jesus. How would Gentile know about Jesus? How would Gentile become acquainted with Jesus? Probably they have heard Jesus preaching the gospel to them. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke, I just couldn't remember which chapter. I think it could be Luke chapter 7, if I'm not wrong. I can't remember. There was a mention of a Gentile. I think it was a Gentile centurion, but I know it's definitely a Gentile who actually contributed to the building of the synagogue in Capernaum. And Jesus said, I've not seen such faith in Israel, right, among the Jews, but yet among the Gentiles there is one who actually contributed to the building of the synagogue in Capernaum. So there are Gentiles who may be attracted to Jesus, attracted to Judaism. Probably this man may have been attracted to Jesus, but whatever it is, I think the driving force for him to go to Jesus was that the son was sick and he was from Capernaum. So he traveled all the way to Cana, and remember Cana and Capernaum was about 20 over kilometers. That will probably be at least 5-6 hours of journey by road. It's about 15 miles. If you walk on average, it's about 3 miles to 3.5 miles per hour, depending on your speed. For us, Malaysian is maybe 2.5 miles because we walk slower because of the hot weather. But in the West, people walk a little bit faster because of the cooler weather. So on average, about 3 miles. So it's 15 miles that will be in 5 hours journey by road. And he would have to spend the night in Cana. So this official will walk about 4-5 hours to Jesus and beg Jesus, Jesus, please come to Capernaum, which is your hometown, which is a town that you are based on. Come, my son was sick and is close to death. Now, interestingly, verse 48, Jesus replied in a very interesting manner. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. Now, what is interesting in this phrase, if you look at it, unless you people, that is in plural, see signs and wonder, and then Jesus told him, you will never believe. Now, this is a situation that as if Jesus was talking to this royal official, but yet he was addressing the crowd. Just imagine this scenario. If the royal official is here, Jesus will be doing such thing. Unless you people see signs and wonder, you will never believe. Something like that, It's like, suddenly, Jesus uses this royal official to teach everyone a lesson. Now, why do you follow me? Why do you welcome me? It's because you see signs plus wonders. It's not merely the signs and wonders. You will not believe. So at the same time, Jesus was addressing the crowd. At the same time, he was also addressing this royal official. And then in verse 49, the royal official said, Sir, come down before my child dies. This is a second plea to Jesus. Jesus, come, please come. Then Jesus in verse 50 said, Go, your son will live. Let me pause for a moment here. Go, your son will live. Now, we always have the benefit of hindsight. When we look at, we know that this man took Jesus as his word, he departed, and his son was healed. But let me try to put you into a situation where you can imagine yourself to be the royal official. Here you have traveled 4-5 hours to Cana to plead with Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal your son. Jesus doesn't seem very interesting, unless you people believe, and Jesus was still teaching. And so this royal official had to beg Jesus, Lord, please, my son, please come before he dies. He's so close to death already, and I've already come 5 hours, I've lost 5 hours, and you need another 5 hours to go back. Lord, it's very urgent. This is not where you can send someone to emergency and you will get medical attention immediately. 5 hours will have passed when we travel from Capernaum to Cana. And don't forget, you need another 5 hours to travel back. That is provided that Jesus can go straight away without people blocking him, people wanting him to heal other people as well. So imagine the desperation of the father. Then suddenly Jesus said, just go. Your son will live. I wonder if you are that royal official at this point in time, put yourself in the shoes of this person. After hearing the unexpected reply from Jesus, how would you have responded? Will you just take Jesus as his word and then go back to Capernaum, and on the way you are shouting, Hallelujah, God has healed my son will live? Or would you go back with a heavy heart and Jesus said, my son will heal, he's not willing to come with me, he's not willing to do anything, and that 5-hour journey back to Capernaum will probably have been the longest journey you have ever undertaken, right? If you're the royal official, how would you have felt? No? Of course, we always have hindsight, right? But don't read the rest. Just think, if you are the father in the desperation situation where your son is sick and even close to death, Jesus said, go, your son will live. So you have turned back to where you come from. How would you have felt? Will you trust Jesus at his word? Do you have any guarantee that your son will live? It's not like our world today. Go, your son will live. I can send a text. Hey, What happened to our son now? You know? And we can get information immediately in our world today. But in those days, all those things does not exist. So what would you do? You make your journey back to Capernaum. Another 5 hours journey. Now, if you are that royal official's son, how would you have felt? Take a minute or two and share what you have felt to your neighbors. You know, share what will be in your heart if you are that royal official's son. How would you have felt? Right? Because we have a long day, I don't want you to sit through up. Talk a little bit. Just share one or two insight for a minute or two to your neighbor. Well, how would you have felt? Turn around and share something to someone. You know? Okay, let's come back. You see, sometimes this is a mystery in life. I call it a mystery in the sense that when God says He will do something, and I think as part of a human being, right, for me, sometimes as a researcher, we always do our research based on evidence. We want evidence. Where is the evidence that my son will live? Apparently, this person had none, right? The only evidence he had was he has to trust Jesus at His word. Go, your son will live. Sometimes we live with this kind of tension, you know. I mean, I'm not a father, but I can imagine if many of you are parents here, you have imagined how that felt. But I also have a mother. And interesting, last night when I was here, somehow, somewhere in between, I got a message from my mom's caregiver that my mom suddenly turned pale and she wasn't feeling well. Right? So I have to I had to quickly send a note to my sister, can you please call home and check on what's happening to mom? So things like that will happen in our lives. Sometimes we just have to surrender it to God. God, you know what is best. I have to surrender it to your hands. Right? Well, good thing she was well after that. It was only for a short moment. Right? We don't know whether the sugar level is too low or BP too low. It's one of those things. Right? But she's well after that. Right? Now, so can you imagine this royal official's son making that 5-hour journey back? And then when he go back, right, verse 51, while he was still on the way, his servant met him with the news that the boy was leaving. So what happened? He was making his way back. In his mind, long 5-hour journey. Then halfway through, his servants came. You know what I say halfway? I think it will be halfway because the royal official asked the servant, hey, my son leaves now. When did it happen? Oh, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So probably what it means that he realized later that it was at that point in time when Jesus said, your son will live, the fever has left the son. So probably the servant quickly departed from there and wanted to go and tell him, hey, your son lives. And then he was making his way home. They probably have met halfway. And this man suddenly realized that, yes, it was at this point in time that Jesus said to him, your son will live, and the fever has left him. And John tells us in verse 53, he and his whole household believed. Now this is very interesting, right? John started by saying that when Jesus went back to Galilee, he went back to a place that he knew he would not be welcome. There's no honor for a prophet in his hometown. And yet the people welcome him. And John was quick to tell us that when the people welcome him, it's not because they believe in Jesus, because they have seen what Jesus has done. They want to hear what Jesus tells them. They want to see what Jesus do to feed their own selfish desires, right? And here enter a Gentile. And Jesus uses Gentile to rebuke the rest of people and tell this Gentile, you go, your son will live. And this Gentile can only take Jesus as his word and nothing else. He didn't see a sign, right, in that point in time. So it's only when the servant told him that your son is now well, he realized that it was at that point in time when Jesus said, your son will live. He can only take Jesus as his word, and he went back home and he realized that the son lives. And because of this, he and his household believed. The whole household believed. So John is drawing out that, hey, you look at these two groups of people, the Jewish people and the Gentile. One believe by unbelieving. They are prepared to walk away if they didn't hear what they like to hear. John chapter 6 tells us that they all walk away because they said, this was a hard teaching, who can accept it? But yet the Gentile enter into the scene, truly believe in what Jesus said, and his son lives, and as a result, he believe. And this is a genuine belief of a Gentile. And John said that this was the second sign that Jesus performed after coming back from Judea in Galilee. And what is even more significant, as I said last night, it started with first sign in Cana, a Jewish family. Then Jesus went to Jerusalem, cleansed the temple, conversation with Nicodemus, all deal with Jewish people, and then to the Samaritans, the half-Jews, and then now to the Gentile. And the Samaritans say that Jesus is truly the Savior of the world, and this find its fulfillment when this Gentile and his household believed. This is the second sign. So you have the Cana cycle. Let me ask you a question. Now in John talked about the first sign, turning the water to wine, right? The second sign that Jesus did here is to heal the official son. The first sign, Jesus has power over quality. The wine is the best wine. There's something new that Jesus is doing. In the second sign, Jesus has power over distance. He need not be physically present in order to heal. That points to him being God. That distance does not limit him. God is omnipresent. He can be anywhere. All of us can't be at two places at one time, but God can be. And distance is not a hindrance to him. He can say the word and something can be done there. So you can see that there is this power over distance, power over space, that Jesus truly is God. The first sign, the second sign. Now, interestingly, after this, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh sign, John stopped counting already. John only mentioned the first sign, the second sign. And then after that, whatever sign that Jesus did, we have to read that this is the third, the fourth, the fifth, right? The third sign is not mentioned. This is the third sign that Jesus did. This is the fourth sign that Jesus did. John never mentioned that. Only mentioned the first and the second. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered why? Is this something to make us think on it? To be honest, I also don't know the answer. But something for us, but I don't know. I always find things like that in the scripture quite fascinating. You know, it tells you first sign, second sign, and it stops counting after that. You know? And the first and second has to do with Cana. Maybe John is reminding us that this is a Cana cycle. It's a complete cycle where it starts with the Jewish family, it ends with the Gentile. That is like an inclusive. It's like the Cana is like the both end of the book end that you put your books here. This is it. This is a cycle. Because when we move on to chapter 5, John starts a new cycle, and it's the cycle that we call the festival cycle, because from John chapter 5 onwards, everything surrounds on the Jewish festival. Here is Cana, first sign, second sign. Then the third one onwards is all surrounding on Jewish festival. You talk about the festival of the tabernacles, the festival of Passover, the feast of dedication, Sabbath. It all surrounds on Jewish festival. That is the next cycle. Now we're going to move to John chapter 5 shortly, but before that, let's take a 10 minutes break, and we'll come back at about 10 o'clock. Would that be okay? All right, we'll just pause and then we continue on the next section on the next sign. Right? So you may stretch yourself. Now I think later on we'll have a longer coffee break. So this is a short one, right? Just stretch yourself, go for toilet break. I think later on we'll have a longer break at 10:45. When we come to John chapter 5 to chapter 10, in this 6 chapters, there are 4 signs being mentioned. Right? Jesus healed the man that is invalid. Jesus feed the 5,000. Jesus walked on water, and Jesus healed a man that is born blind. So there are 4 signs. Then after this is a final sign, which is raising Lazarus from the dead. Now, in John chapter 5 to 10, where the 4 signs are being mentioned, John structured its narrative according to the festival cycle by drawing on the various Jewish festival. There is a festival of Sabbath, the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Tabernacle, and the Feast of Dedication. At the same time, John will also highlight for us that there is an increased controversy where the conflict between Jesus and the religious authority increased, as you can see in this few chapter. Now, in John chapter 5 verse 1, we read that Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. John didn't mention specifically what festival it is. Most scholars believe that perhaps it could have been the festival of the Passover. We do not know, but we suspect that that could be the case because Passover is the major Jewish festival. And while Jesus was in Jerusalem during the time of Passover, he performed the 3rd sign, that is to heal the man that has been invalid for 38 years by the pool, and landing him into conflict and controversy with the religious authority, because Jesus chose to heal this man that has been an invalid for 38 years on a Sabbath. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, but Jesus did that. So you see, there is a Jewish celebration in Jerusalem. There is a Sabbath, right? Now, as we move on, okay, to chapter 6, verse 4, we see that Jesus was in Jerusalem again. The Jewish festival, no, sorry, not Jerusalem, Jesus was in Galilee. The Jewish Passover festival was near. And so here in Galilee, nearing to the festival of the Passover, Jesus did 2 signs, the 4th and the 5th sign. That is, Jesus feeds the 5,000 and Jesus walked on water. Now, it was after Jesus walked on water, right? The 5th sign, Jesus declared that he is the bread of life. I am the bread of life. Now, moving on, when we come to chapter 7, verse 2, right, we see that when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea." Right? So there was a reference to another Jewish festival. Okay. Yeah. Chapter 7, verse 2, Feast of the Tabernacle, where they commemorate the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So this is a celebration where the Jewish people will build a tent, and then they commemorate the period of them wandering in the wilderness. Originally, the festival of tabernacle or booth is supposed to be like a harvest festival where they live in a tent in their harvest field, and this is the season of harvesting. They live in a tent in the harvest field. That was the original intention, and subsequently it is then celebrating, commemorating the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So chapter 7 talk about the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's during this, after John chapter 2, we see that there was increased controversy between Jesus and the people and the Jewish leaders. And here is where Jesus pronounced that he is the light of the world in chapter 8 verse 12. I am the light of the world. And then when we come to chapter 9, Jesus healed the man that was born blind. And after that, Jesus continued to declare himself that I am the gate, and then I am the good shepherd in chapter 10. And this leads us to another Jewish festival as we come to chapter 10 verse 22, and Jesus celebrates the feast of dedication. Now if you turn to John chapter 10 verse 22, you see there came the festival of dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. Now this feast of dedication is not a feast that is commanded by the law of Moses. This feast was added much later. Now this was a feast that the Jewish people celebrated during the intertestamental period. Now we think about the Old Testament, the New Testament. In between the Old and New Testament is a period we call the intertestamental period. Sometimes we call this period 400 years of silence. But let me assure you, it's never silent during that 400 years period between Malachi and Matthew. During this period, the temple that was rebuilt during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah was desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes, one of the rulers, in the year 167 BCE. Now what Antiochus Epiphanes did was he marched into the Jerusalem temple and he desecrated the temple by slaughtering a pig and put it on the altar. Right? And because of that, it led to the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabean revolt, where there was a period of revolt and rebellion, where the Jewish people managed to take back the temple from the ruling authorities back then. So they managed to capture back the temple, and then when they did that, they rededicated the temple to the Lord. That was during the intertestamental period. Right? So that was 100 over years before the time of Jesus. And when they rededicated the temple, they celebrate a feast called the Feast of Dedication, and so it is called Hanukkah, right? And sometimes it's also known as the Festival of Light. Right? So this commemorates the rededication of the temple, and this happened during the intertestamental period. So this is a celebration that is not commanded in the law of Moses, but it happened during the intertestament period, about 100 over years before the time of Jesus. And the Jews would celebrate this every winter, probably in the month of October, November, around that time. They will celebrate this celebration, and it's called the Festival of Lights. Now, some of us may be familiar with the menorah, the Jewish menorah, the 7 lampstands, right? And to commemorate the Feast of Dedication, the Jews would light the lampstand, but it's not 7, but it's 9. So you all will see sometimes there's 9 lampstands, and that is to commemorate the Feast of Dedication. It is also called the Feast of Light. And it's quite interesting during this period of time that Jesus declared himself that I am the good shepherd. Now what is there so significant here when you think about the Feast of Dedication? The Feast of Dedication is supposed to remember the return of the people to the Lord by rededicating the temple. But the temple authority, the religious authority, the Pharisee, have not led the people like the good shepherd. So Jesus declared himself during this period of time that he is the good shepherd that is leading the people. Right, so we can see that this second cycle here centers around the Jewish festival. Of course, you have the Passover, you have the Sabbath, you have the Feast of the Tabernacle, you have the Feast of Dedication. And over this 5-6 chapters, as John structures his narrative around the Jewish festival, we see that there are 4 signs. And not only 4 signs, we see a number of the I am statements that Jesus made. I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the gate, I am the good shepherd. And all this narrative, the signs, the I am, they are all interwoven together. They are all connected. Right? So we're going to look at it, how all these are connected together shortly. Right? So let's turn our attention to the 5th sign. Right? Sorry, not the fifth sign, the third sign. What I'm thinking. Can you imagine, I've not had heavy breakfast. If I had heavy breakfast, nasi lemak, all the blood will flow down there. I will probably say more wrong things. The third sign, okay, John chapter 5, the third sign, the healing of the man at the pool. Okay, let us read that, verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 roof colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he has been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Now, I think maybe 2-3 years ago when I was here, when I talked about archaeology and the New Testament, those of you who are here might remember this narrative because I draw on some of the archaeological background. Right? So I'm probably just going to repeat a little bit things that I've said back then. Now, in this particular pool called the Pool of Bethesda, we see this map that has been drawn on the site itself. Today, when you visit the site, what you will see are ruins, and you will see the Byzantine Basilica and the Crusader Chapel. They are built on top of each other, right? The Byzantine Basilica was built probably in the 5th century, and the Crusader Chapel was built over it in the 12th century. So there are a lot of layers that was being built on it. Now, underneath the Crusader and the Byzantine Basilica, if you're going to dig underneath, you will see this boundary here. Do you see this line here? These are 2 pools. It is called the northern pool and the southern pool. So they are actually 2 pools. And in the middle is a central dam. Right? And next to this pool here, there is a pagan medicinal bath that takes place, and there is a temple that is dedicated to the Greek god of Asclepios, which is the god of healing. Right? So when you look at this side, you can see a few things stands out already, right? What you see are the Crusader Chapel and the Byzantine Basilica today that it remains. But if you go underneath, you can see the southern pool, the northern pool, and the pagan bath here, where they believe that Asclepios, the god of healing, is always there to heal them. Right. So you probably had to you probably had to imagine that the red and the blue color structures was not there. Then you see the 2 dams, right? Right. Now, how would this look like in the 1st century? Let me show you. Okay, what it is today. So if you go to this side, what you will see here, you can still see the Byzantine chapel here. Remember, I told you the Byzantine chapel, that's 12th century, and the Byzantine Basilica, and the Crusader Chapel. The Crusader Chapel, the Basilica is here. The Byzantine Basilica, the Crusader Chapel, 12th century, 5th century. You can see it on this side. And at the same time, what you see is that there are actually two different levels. Right? This is higher level, this is lower level. So this would have been the northern pool, this would have been the southern pool. One pool is higher than the other. So maybe this photo will be clearer. So you can see northern pool here, the central dam, and the southern pool here. So you can imagine there are two pools here. So in the first century, it will look something like this. Right? So you can see here, there is a northern pool, there is a southern pool. This is the model of the second temple in Jerusalem. So this northern pool is a higher structure, the southern pool is a slightly lower structure, and then there is a gate in between here. This is used as a reservoir, like a dam, that control the movement of water. Right? And what happened was a pool was subsequently added to it because the population in Jerusalem has increased. You needed to extend another pool. So what happened was you have the original pool that is 4 roofs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then when you extend another roof, you just extend the pool here, you just extend the roof here. So it's described as 1 roof, 2 roof, 3 roof, 4 roof, and 5 roof. That's why John described this is a 5-roof colonnade building. Right? 5 roof colonnade, 1 roof, 2 roof, 3 roof, 4 roof, 5 roof. So this is the earlier pool, the northern pool. The southern pool was added to it just before the turn of the 1st century. So there are now 2 pools in the times of Jesus. Now, quite interesting as a little fact that many scholars actually think that John could have made an error when he described that there is a pool with 5-roof colonnade. If you think of a building with 5 roofs, we often think that it is in the shape of a pentagon, right? But in the 1st century, all the buildings are either squarish or rectangular. You don't have the pentagon-shaped building. So quite a number of scholars have actually questioned whether John got it right or not. John may have misrepresented this particular pool. It was not until archaeological excavation is carried out that they actually found out, hey, there's actually 2 pools, 1 pool here, 1 pool here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5-roof colonnade was actually an accurate description by John, and John is faithful in his description when he's writing his gospel. Right. So in this particular sign, what was interesting here, if you want to see the fact, it was in 1964 that archaeological excavation was carried out, and they discovered that there is actually 2 pools there, and the 5-roof colonnade was there. So before 1964, everyone thought that John made a mistake, you know. So it was a fairly recent discovery that we find that John is actually accurate. Now, as you think about this story, this man, this healing event, this 3rd sign, it happened on a Sabbath. What was interesting is that as this healing takes place on the Sabbath, on the one hand, we see how Jesus deals with the blind man. At the same time, we see how the religious leader responded to this event. Now, what is interesting, let me take a look at the religious leaders first before I look at the healing event proper. Now, after this man was healed on the Sabbath, if you look at verse 10, verse 9 and 10, it happened on the Sabbath. The Jewish leaders said to this man who had been healed, "It is Sabbath, the law forbids you." So the Jewish leaders, instead of having any compassion or celebrate with the man that he has been healed, turn around and say, "Hey, you're doing what is forbidden on the Sabbath. You cannot take, you're breaking the Sabbath. You're taking your mat and walking around. You shouldn't do that." It is not that the religious leader do not know him. This man has been lying how many years? 38 years by this pool, right? So if you have been to Jerusalem, you know that this man is always there. What more if you are the local religious leaders, right? Can you imagine the Jewish people when they make the annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem? Hey, hello, I saw you here last year, you're here again. 2 years, you're here again. 10 years later, you still here, still not healed. 20 years later, hello, you still here. Can you imagine the same person lying there for 38 years? And surely the temple authority would have known this man was invalid for many years. But strangely, when they see this man carrying the mat, which means he has been healed, instead of rejoicing with the fact that he has been healed, the first thing they, You break the law. And then not only that, if you continue on, and this man in blind man say, hey, the man who made me well say, take up your mat and walk. Then the religious leader asked, hey, who is this fellow who asked you to take up your mat and walk? And the man didn't know it was Jesus, right? So he couldn't answer that question. But later on, when Jesus found this man in the temple, Jesus said, stop sinning or something worse will happen to you. So this man suddenly realized that it was Jesus. So he went back and reported to the religious authority, hey, it was Jesus. It was Jesus who healed me, right? And then verse 16, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute Jesus, right? So from accusing the man that was being healed for breaking the Sabbath, this religious leader now is going after Jesus. And not only that, when Jesus defended himself, he said, my Father is always at work to this very day, so therefore I'm working. Wow, that is enough to make the religious leader furious. How dare you claim God as your Father? By doing so, you're declaring yourself equal to God. And truly, Jesus is God. But the religious leaders fail to recognize that Jesus is the Lord. In other words, they know the sign that Jesus did. Remember we talked about sign points to Jesus. And then when they have seen the sign and then the sign points to Jesus, the Pharisee refused to believe. And what they wanted to do, they tried to kill Jesus. Jesus' life is in danger now. The religious leaders say that Jesus is such a dangerous person, we must get rid of him at all costs. Don't even keep him alive. That's what they wanted to do. Point is that when you think about it, right, the religious leader missed the fact that someone has been healed. God has compassion on the people. And Jesus himself said that just as a father is working, I have to work. I have to work in order to save life. I have to work in order that I may demonstrate the compassion of God on the people that are in need. But the religious leader tried to persecute Jesus and tried to kill him. And that is why later on in chapter 5, if you continue to read about chapter 5, when Jesus had a long discussion with the religious leader, Jesus said this to them in verse 39 to verse 40. You diligently study the scriptures because you think that by them you possess eternal life. These are the scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me to have life. Okay, you know the scriptures. By studying the scripture, you think you have eternal life. Yes, because if you truly believe in God. But the scripture testify about me, Jesus was saying, but yet you refuse to believe in me. And then John continued to record what Jesus said to the religious leader. I've come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you accept him. How can you believe if you accept praise from another, yet make no effort to obtain praise that comes from the only God? What the Pharisee did was, Jesus come, Jesus never puji them, they never accept him. But another come, they will accept him. Why? All these other people come to the Pharisee, they just bother them. They just praise them. And the Pharisees love praises from men. That's who they are. That's what Jesus said here. And Jesus continued on. If you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you do not believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say? Wow, Jesus really hit out hard at the religious leaders. I'm always very conscious of the fact that just because Jesus has said this to the religious leader. Now, I'm also one of those, a member of clergy who teach people the scripture. I always ask myself, have I also fallen to the trap of Pharisee? Sometimes we may think we know too much, and we often miss the fact that God is at work. Not like yesterday, for a little example I gave, right? Folks like us sometimes can debate, hey, when was the exact point that the water turned into wine? When they scoop out, or when they walk, or when they serve? But to me, these are I mean, it's an interesting intellectual discourse that we want to debate when it happened, but really, it doesn't matter, right? The fact that the water has been turned into wine. If it's important enough, I'm sure John will have recorded to us. It is at this point that the water turned into wine, but he didn't. So let's not argue what was not there, you know. What was there was to remind us that the water has been turned into wine. That is most important. Now, sometimes we can split hair, right? So in this case, Jesus spoke up against the religious authority. So let's come back to this sign itself. So now we've seen how this sign landed Jesus in religious controversy. Let's go back to what Jesus was doing to this man. Let's go back. Look at verse 3 again. Here, a great multitude of disabled people used to lie there, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Which means that on that day when Jesus visited this pool of Bethesda, there are many people that were there. Now you have the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. But of all the people, if you follow the narrative closely, Jesus only zoomed into one person. There's one man that was there that has been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he has been in this condition for a long time, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" Now, this is a very interesting language that Jesus used. Okay, first of all, there are many people that were lying there, but Jesus learned that this man has been there for 38 years. He's a regular feature. Every year you make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, you will see him there. Right? This man has been lying there. And Jesus approached him, out of all the many people, and Jesus asked him this question: "Do you want to be made well?" Now this is a very interesting way, because in other healing account, when Jesus healed, Jesus often say, "Go, your son will live." Or Jesus will say, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Or sometimes, "Your faith has healed you," or "Your faith has saved you." Actually, the Greek words used to describe the healing of Jesus is, "Your faith has saved you." We often translate it as, "Your faith has healed you." The whole idea of save, salvation, is a Jewish concept that when God make you whole, when God heal you, it's not the physical healing per se, it's to make you whole and to restore your relationship with God. That was the idea. That's why it's always said that your faith has saved you and you have been made well. That was the idea behind it. But interestingly, when come to this person, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" And that is not the normal way Jesus would speak to people who want to be healed. Now, interestingly, this very language, "Do you want to be made well?" is a language that is being used to describe Asclepios. Asclepios is a god of healing that would heal people. So Jesus is using the language of Asclepios, "Do you want to be made well?" Now, why is it that Jesus is using this language of Asclepios, by asking this invalid man, "Do you want to be made well?" Now, archaeological excavation has discovered that right there on this site, there was a temple of Asclepios. In the Latin name is called the Seraphis. And this temple of Asclepios is a well-known temple of healing. Now, Asclepios is the powerful god in Greek mythology, and it was believed that he has power to heal. His statue will always have a rod and a snake, and that was always a symbol. And it was believed that all his family, all his daughters are all, they have a name that's related to medical, to health and wellness. Right? So you can see plenty of statue of Asclepios. So if you go to any of the museums today, you can see plenty of statue of Asclepios, because he's such a well-known and such a powerful god. And many of the ancient cities in the first century would have a large temple of Asclepios. And what the people would do back then is, when they have been healed by Asclepios, they will make a replica of their parts of body and dedicate it to Asclepios. So when you go to Corinth, for example, to the healing sanctuary of Asclepios, you will see there are many replicas of hand, feet that the people make because they has been healed by this god. So you can see the whole arm, the fingers, the palm, right? You can see the whole leg, the upper body. So these are all the various parts of people that are not well. They go to Asclepios, they prayed, and they were healed. And again, you see the leg, the feet. Of course, you see the breast, the male genitals. You can see the eye as well. You can see the ear. That means you're blind, you can be healed also. If you have hearing problem, you can be healed as well. And not only that, you also have babies as well. Probably a baby that's born that's not well, you bring it to Temple Asclepios, pray for healing, and you get well. You make a replica of your baby, you dedicated it to Asclepios. There's one interesting one in Corinth. Someone dedicated a brain. Maybe he has some kind of mental illness, epilepsy, whatsoever. So they make a replica of the brain and dedicate it to Asclepios, showing that he has been healed. Not only human, you have all kinds of animals as well. So this God can heal animals as well. So he's a human doctor, he's also a veterinarian. He's also a vet. He can heal animals, pao ka liao kind of thing, you know. And then those richer will make a marble relief, a marble replica. So this person, his name is Tyche, that's his name. He said that he dedicated this to Asclepios, and Hygia, the daughter, is from Tyche, that expresses his thanksgiving. So his left leg must have not been well and has been healed. And there were also heads of children that were dedicated. Probably it could mean that the children is not well, or it could also mean that perhaps they have a safe delivery, right, of the baby. Right? Again, cure of deafness. And interestingly, if you go to Epidaurus in Greece has a large sanctuary of Asclepios. And they have two large stones, the few stones on display. These stones are bigger than me, you know. It's probably 8 feet in height. And what this stone did was, it contained all the numerous inscriptions. They inscribed on the stone all the miraculous cures at Asclepios. As you heal so and so was what sickness is being healed. So they actually keep a whole record of how powerful this God is. You see, all this shows Asclepios was so powerful and he can heal everybody. And one person, even this person, interestingly, Marcus Julius Apelles, he even made an inscription of how when he go and seek for healing at Asclepios for his illness, Asclepios tell him what to do. For example, he says that the treatment include diet, exercise, and use of natural therapeutic substances. So he said his diet was based on bread and cheese. He had to eat it with celery mixed with lettuce. He has to drink orange juice mixed with water, with milk and honey. He has to take bath, clay bath, and then he has to go and run and walk. He has to study in the library, but he said that study in the library lead to headache. And then also wetting himself with wine to smooth the teeth. I don't mind that. You rub it with salt and mustard, you know, and so on. So he tells you how Asclepios prescribed healing treatment for him, right? And then there is also a formality involved. Okay, after Asclepios heal you already, right? You want to dedicate an offering to Asclepios, you tell you these are the procedures you must follow. So it's very detailed, it's very well established practice. If you go to Athens, there is also another inventory of the dedication that people make to Asclepios. So they even keep, so and so Lim Ka Yong was sick and he was healed, and therefore he made this dedication to Asclepios. So they detail down all healing events, all the thanksgiving that people make to Asclepios. So there are plenty of this. So it shows that Asclepios is such a powerful God. And here in Asclepios, you have a large temple. For example, if you go to Pergamon, in Turkey, one of the 7 churches of Revelation, this is a theater. If you look down from Pergamon here, you can see the temple of Asclepios right at the distance. And this is how the temple of Asclepios look like. Huge, big complex. And this is a well-known temple of Asclepios. Now, so you think about this. Here there is a temple of Asclepios right by the northern and southern pool. many people who are lame, who was blind or paralyzed, lying there, and they were hoping that there will be one who will jump into the pool, or because it's next only to Asclepius, they believe that Asclepius has power to heal them. So you have this invalid man right outside the temple of Asclepius for how many years? 38 years. Now can you imagine, you lie outside a temple of a god of healing for 38 years and you never get healed? Can you imagine someone lying sick outside the door of the church for 38 years? Every Sunday we come in and out, we didn't even bother that the person. What does it speak about us? What does it speak about us as brothers and sisters? What does it speak about the church? What does it speak about the God that we worship? You know what I mean? So here is this man, 38 years. Asclepius is powerless to do anything to him, to even heal him. That's why when Jesus saw this man, he came to this man. And the first question that Jesus asked, do you want to get well? Are you expecting Asclepius to heal you? That was the language that Jesus used. Of course, this man wanted it. So Jesus said, you take up your mat and walk. And he did so. Now, interestingly, if you read carefully in John's narrative, right, this man has been invalid for 38 years. Jesus merely said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And once this man was cured, he picked up his mat and he walked. Hey, no one helped him to get up. Now, if you and I were the invalid man, when Jesus said, take up your mat and walk, I'll probably look at Jesus. Wait, can't you see the condition I'm in? To go into the pool, so I need someone to help me. You ask me to take up my mat and walk? Sometimes you see how absurd it can be, right? It makes no sense, right? But this man was cured. He knew something happened to him. He took up his mat with faith and he walked. And John tells us he doesn't even know who healed him. Because the Pharisee asked him, he said, 我不知道, I don't know. Right? And it was only when Jesus appeared to him and revealed himself to him, he finally realized it was Jesus. So what does this healing account tell us? It tells us a few interesting things. First of all, this healing happens right in front of the temple of Asclepius. It tells us that this powerful God of healing, all that I've shown you, right? How powerful He is. He can heal so many people. He is powerless. When come to this invalid man, he was outside his temple for 38 years. He never gets healed. Jesus came, say the word, he was healed. What does this sign points to? Remember, sign points beyond itself? Sign points to Jesus. What does it tell us about Jesus? It tells us that Jesus is far more powerful and greater than the God of healing, right? Jesus can reverse the 38 years of wasted years on this man's life just by saying the word. And Asclepius can't do that. And secondly, it also tells us that this man lies outside the temple Asclepius, and Asclepius is known as a God of compassion, benevolent God. But how can it be that a God of compassion had no compassion for 38 years outside your temple? Jesus came, say the word, heal this person, demonstrating that he's also a God that is filled with compassion. He knows and understands the pain and the hurt that this man has gone through, and he is willing to reverse whatever situation that this man was in. Jesus was a compassionate God. He's a God that is full with compassion. So what does this sign point to? It points to Jesus as a far more powerful God compared to Asclepius. Not only that, He is a most merciful, most compassionate God compared to Asclepius. If you will, there is a contestation of power that's taking place there now. Do you want to get well? And Jesus healed him. Not only healed him physically, but restore his relationship with God. Because later on, Jesus told this man, you are well now, stop sinning. So make sure you live your life. You walk in the light and live your life that is pleasing to God so that you do not go back to sin anymore. So we can know that this is a far more powerful God, a God of healing. And not only that, He is a God that is full of compassion compared to Asclepius. 38 years, God can redeem the time. I wonder if any one of us often think that we have wasted years. No. I think when we come to God, there's no such thing as wasted years. God can redeem the time. God can still use us, no matter how young or how old we are. After all, people say age is just a number only, right? God is willing to use all of us. And He is the most compassionate God. He is a powerful God. And this is what this sign points to. It's just not healing the invalid. It points to Jesus. And as a result of that, it landed Jesus into controversy. So that's why I started with that. A powerful God, a merciful God. Jesus healed the invalid for 38 years. Okay, now I'm going to pause here. It's our coffee time now. So let's take a break and we'll come back at 11:15 when we look at the fourth and the fifth sign. Right? I don't know whether Grace has an announcement. Yeah.